F-Zero 99. Hey there, Vince here, and I feel like I'm obligated to talk about the events that transpired over the past several days with the most recent Nintendo Direct. There was this weird little game that came out called F-Zero 99. I'm not really a fan of F-Zero, I'm just kind of a casual player, I guess. I don't know. F-Zero for the Super Famicom, complete in box. F-Zero for the Super Nintendo, Player's Choice Edition. A Player's Guide to accompany the two. F-Zero X, complete in box. The F-Zero X expansion pack to go along with it. And as well, a Player's Guide to go with those. F-Zero Maximum Velocity. F-Zero GP Legends. F-Zero Climax. The Japanese release of F-Zero GX, the North American release of F-Zero GX. Just this past week from Pink Gorilla Games, I picked up the Australian release for F-Zero GX. More importantly, the F-Zero AX arcade game. The soundtrack for both of these, as well as a player's guide to go along with these two, and the F-Zero GP Legend anime. Speaking of Pink Gorilla Games real quick, while I picked up the Australian F-Zero GX game, they also have a promotion going on right now where you can get these Pokemon Trick or Trade packs. So let's go ahead and open this live on camera, and then we'll get back to the action. So, Zubat, Spectrier, however they pronounce that, and Graveyard. Okay. That's so neat that they're doing that. So let's take a trip back in time real quick. Battle Royale games came out like PUBG and Fortnite, and then just out of the blue, just randomly out of nowhere, Nintendo dropped this bombshell on us called Tetris 99. And I was like, that sounds kind of neat, but I played it and immediately I was hooked on it. And years later, 2023, it is one of my absolute all-time favorite video games now. I play that thing all the freaking time. Whenever I got like 10, 15 minutes, I just want to sit down, blow off some steam, I'll just go in there, play a couple rounds and get it over with. I love it to death. I thought that with Nintendo having such an amazing release of Tetris 99, that we'd see this idea cloned instantaneously overnight with a bunch of other games. I thought companies would replicate this with games like Dr. Mario, Panel de Pon, Columns, and especially one of my all-time favorites, Puzzle Fighter. All of these games would transition into that Tetris 99 format flawlessly. Alas, that never happened. That kind of actually makes me sad. It's such an easy idea and nobody capitalized on it. But Nintendo did keep pushing forward. We have Pac-Man 99 and Mario 35, but admittedly, I didn't really care much for either of those games. Mario 35 was short-lived and Pac-Man 99 is going to disappear any day now. And then the Nintendo Direct last week dropped yet another bombshell on us, F-Zero 99. It takes the original Super Nintendo or Super Famicom game and throws you into a match with 99 total players. So you and 98 others get to battle it out to see who's the best racer of them all. First impressions, the game is pure chaos. I'm gonna tell you right now, like if you've only put like 5-10 minutes into the game and you hate it, I don't blame you. I do not blame you one bit. The game is very confusing and chaotic when you first get into it. Having 99 cars just all battle it out on tracks that were designed realistically for only 4 cars and then a few, of those clone ghost cars, whatever, just the CPU cars, it feels very, very squished. I kind of wish the tracks were scaled up a little bit. But with that said, Nintendo's done some really cool, new, innovative things with the original F-Zero to kind of accommodate for that. And then once you get into the flow of things and you start understanding these changes, it doesn't feel so chaotic and cramped anymore. First thing I'll say is I absolutely love, I really, really love how they did the starting line. So in traditional F-Zero games, it's just like any other race game where you have a staggered starting line where you may have like 2 or 4 or 6 cars, whatever, in the first row, then a second row, third row, fourth row, so on and so forth. And that gives a very distinct advantage to whoever starts up front. This game, however, takes a different approach. They have most of the original tracks However, they completely changed how you do the starting line for most of the tracks. They've added this additional starting area, or whatever you want to call it, like a start line area, off to the side of the track, and then they use one of the track's jumps to jump you into the main track. And in the starting area, it's just this extremely wide line, and it's like a semicircle, and so everyone has the exact same distance to get to that first jump point, or that final jump point to get onto the main track, and that jumps you right into where the starting line is, the traditional starting line. I think this is a really, really cool and innovative idea. And each of the starting lines are actually unique for every single track. So some of them have a series of jumps, some of them have a series of boosts, some of them have a series of combinations of both. Some of them actually have crisscrossing patterns. So half the cars are on the left side, half are on the right, and you actually cross paths and then re-merge in together before going to the start line. And with that, you can actually kind of like shift from one path to the other while jumping. Some really, really cool stuff that they've done with this, and I can't wait to see what they do with more tracks. Because that's one really important thing, is we don't have all of the original tracks yet. If you play single race mode, you get a choice of one of two tracks, and that's it. Well, for each time you play, that is. Each of the 99 players is allowed to vote on track A or track B out of two randomly selected tracks from whatever the current track pool happens to be. The night the game released, it seemed to very, very heavily favor Mute City and Big Blue, probably because they want to just ease people into familiarity before really getting into the chaos. And I don't blame them for that. The one downside to that first night, though, is even when they did start having some of the other tracks, such as like Sand Ocean, anytime Mute City would come up as a votable track, it would instantly win no matter what. Like 75% of the votes would just always go to Mute City. Because, again, that familiarity thing. If Mute City wasn't there but Big Blue was, people, again, would always vote Big Blue over whatever the other track happened to be available at the time. And the only way to be able to practice tracks, playing single player, is you have to be able to race on a track normally. So it made it very difficult and frustrating to unlock these other tracks in the first night of play because of this. Starting on the second day, basically everybody got over their obsession of those two tracks, and the voting actually usually shifted the opposite direction. People kind of got burned out on Mute City and Big Blue. On day two, almost exclusively, the vote would go against those tracks. So you actually got a chance to play all of the other tracks in the track pool. Day one kind of got repetitive, but on day two, things really cleared up a lot, and since then, things have kind of been a little bit more even on the voting, regardless either direction at this point. So you never actually know what track you're going to play when you see the two tracks come up on the voting screen. As you can see behind me up here, there's an entire empty shelf, and that's because I keep all four of those spaces dedicated to F-Zero. So yeah, I am kind of a fan of these games, and specifically, I have the 3 Game Boy Advance games in front of me here. I think these in particular are going to be interesting going forward because these run on almost the exact same mechanics as the Super Nintendo and Super Famicom games, meaning that the sprites for the ships on these games could potentially appear in F-Zero 99, and the tracks from these games could eventually appear in F-Zero 99, and I would welcome that. But for right now, we only have the choice of 4 vehicles, the original 4 vehicles in the original F-Zero. There are also none of the Satellaview cars available right now. However, some people have been inspecting the game data and have found track names that are unavailable yet that match the track names from some of the Satellaview downloads. We don't know if those will actually be the Satellaview tracks, or if those are just temporary placeholders, or if it's something Nintendo's experimenting with that'll never get released. We don't know yet, but right now there is a little bit of hope we might actually get some of the Satellaview content too, which I am personally looking forward to if that ever happens. So going back to traditional F-Zero, in all of the games, you select Grand Prix mode and then you go and race other cars, or you select practice mode and you're basically in a time trial mode. This game, however, is different. They still have the practice mode where you can play solo single player, like I mentioned, for time trials. And like I said, you have to race on a track in any of the normal modes to be able to unlock it there to have that functionality. However, the main race mode that appears on the game, you only get one single track rather than a Grand Prix, which could be 5 or 6 tracks or however many tracks are depending on which game you're playing. But in that mode, you're still playing F-Zero 99, and that's like the main game race mode. And then there's a secondary mode, which is on a timer cycle that changes different modes that you can play, one of which being Grand Prix. So you select that, and you get the Night Cup from the original F-Zero, so those 5 tracks, and you go through them sequentially, unless you either place out or your ship blows up. So on each successive track, they whittle it down further and further to how many cars are available for the next race. So I believe it's like the top 80 advance, then the top 60, and so on and so forth, to where once you're on Silence, you're down to only 20 cars. Silence in Grand Prix mode so far is the one track that uses the traditional starting lines. So that counters what I was saying earlier. In that specific track, because it whittles you down to 20 cars total, it has the traditional 20-car starting positions, and since you all have a relative position based on your scores from the past 4 tracks, that's how you're lined up. So whoever has the lowest scores in front and whoever has the high scores in back. Kind of a way to do that rubber band balancing that Nintendo is always known and good for. Speaking of rubber banding, that's actually something that's really, really interesting in this game, a new mechanic that they've added. So first off, they added the spin mechanic from the newer F-Zero game, so you can do spin attacks against other cars, potentially either blowing them up, or even if you don't, knocking into them will drop out these little golden orbs that you can pick up. There's this giant car that you can also run into that spawns on the track from time to time that will just give you a massive amount of golden orbs too. And then when the meter up here fills up, you then, when you hit your boost button, instead of doing a boost, you go into this upper track that's normally invisible. So there's actually 2 tracks and one for every single track in the game. And when you're on the upper track, you're constantly boosting, and you have no worries whatsoever about your ship blowing up either. While up there are guardrails guarding the entire thing, so there's no area you can fall off the edge, there's no jumps for you to be able to jump off the track or anything like that. And while you're up there, each map has safe areas to lower you back down on the track. So if it's in a very tight turn or something like that, it will actually keep you on that upper track longer than what your meter is registered for until you're on a safe area to return down to lower track. You can actually abuse this to your advantage to get past certain tricky areas or to stay on that faster track longer. Also, the boosting mechanic in this game is completely different than the original game. It actually mirrors closer to what the newer games have, where boosting uses your life bar rather than just having a certain number of little boosts that you can use. And that also means that life in this game is a lot more precious than it is in pretty much any other game ever made, because now you have 98 other cars trying to whittle away your life while you're also using your life to make yourself go faster. There is this whole balance that you have to do with that. And for each of the 4 cars, the amount of life your boost uses, how long your boost goes, and how quickly you regenerate your life all come into play. For instance, the Fire Stingray has a very low life recovery, versus the Golden Fox has very fast life recovery. While the Golden Fox is a slower car overall, you can boost more often, versus in the Fire Stingray having a higher max speed, you can't boost as much because you're not going to be able to get as much life back each time you go over the life recovery areas on the track. Another game mode that rotates into that right slot is Team Battles. So what it does is it takes all the racers, splits them up in half between the green team and the pink team, and has them race against each other to see who comes out on top. In this mode, you get points for different things, such as what rank everybody is when they cross the finish line. You get points for every time you smash into a car of the opposite color, and so on and so forth. So it's another really cool mode. You'll just be able to dink around in the game, and you don't necessarily have to be the best racer as long as you're helping out your team to, work collectively to get the highest score. Also in that second slot there, sometimes they'll have what they call the pro races, and these are more difficult tracks from the harder difficulty cups from the original game, such as going to Port Town, for instance. I love this idea because it gives us a chance to experiment and play with some of the harder tracks optionally rather than required. So in the normal mode, we have basically the first 4 tracks of Night Cup. It doesn't have Silence yet from what I've seen, but it has at least the first 4. Versus going over to the pro mode, you're only going to be having those difficult tracks. So I know a lot of fans are disappointed that this isn't F-Zero GX HD or, some new F-Zero game or anything like that. And I had mixed emotions about this too until later on day one where I really put some serious time into this game. So why did Nintendo make this game of all games when, the fans are crying for a new game? Well, you have to take a step back and think of what fans really are. Like, there are fans, and then there are consumers, the ones who are actually purchasing the game. Look at this from a business perspective for a second. F-Zero is a franchise that's been sitting on idle for 2 decades now, other than cameos in games like Smash. The install base for F-Zero GX is debated whether even hit 1 million or not. There are some reports that say yes, some reports that say no. I'm not going to get into that argument. I don't know the numbers. Either way, that may sound like a big number, but when you look at other Nintendo properties that are pulling in 30, 40, 50 million sales, 1 million is nothing. So what I think this game represents, actually, Nintendo is using this as a freebie marketing tool for the franchise to reintroduce it to existing consumers, but introduce it for the first time to new consumers. There's over 100 million Switch installs in the world right now. How many of those people have NSO? Everybody on NSO gets this game for free, and so people are going to be like, oh, free game, I'll download it, I'll play it, let's see what it is. And for a lot of people, and I mean more than the install base of all of these games combined, other than playing on emulators, this will be their very, very first F-Zero experience ever. Keep that in mind. This is an introductory series now. They're reintroducing this series to the consumers, to new consumers that have not been a part of this collection that you and I have been a part of all these years. That will gauge interest, that'll gain some feedback, and it's up to all of us to tell Nintendo, hell yeah, keep doing this. Give us a real game now. We love what you did here. We're going to keep playing it. Now give us the next GX. Give us, whatever, I know why they don't have it on the Switch if you go by their current naming scheme. F-Zero X, GX for GameCube, AX for arcade, SX for the Switch. They don't want F-Zero sex. Anyway, though, I'm sure the marketing department can figure out a better naming scheme than I can. The other point with this is there's been more and more increasing rumors that the successor to the Nintendo Switch, which will probably come out next year, may be called the Super Nintendo Switch, going back to the Super Nintendo days. And if you think of the Super Nintendo, F-Zero was a launch day title to showcase what Mode 7 was like on the console, to showcase the cool rendering capabilities of that console. Maybe, just maybe, they're saving the next F-Zero game for us, the mainline F-Zero game for us, for the new Super Nintendo Switch. Oh, and yes, I have gotten a first place victory, but I wasn't running my capture card at the time, so all you get is the Nintendo Switch's really terrible encoding. F-Zero for the Super Famicom, complete in box. That's going to be a problem. And other similar puzzle. Until I really got in and put some serious time. I know why they don't have it on the Switch. And I assume there'd be about the same here in F-Zero.